along with Associate North Carolina Supreme Court Justice Anita Earls. States and local governments are receiving or have received a massive amount of funds to support pandemic recovery through the American Rescue Plan. Two of the primary purposes of the funds are to strengthen public health responses to conditions worsened by the pandemic and to serve communities disproportionately impacted by COVID. In both cases, several recommendations of the task force are on point to address both criminal justice reform and COVID-19 related mitigation and behavioral health needs. The problems of substance use disorder and mental illness in our communities were greatly exacerbated during the pandemic. The American Rescue Plan recognizes these negative impacts and facilitates local governments investing their ARP funds to respond to these behavioral health challenges. One critical way to do this is through implementing diversion programs. Our session today will focus on how communities can establish and expand access to pre-arrest diversion programs, which was actually a recommendation made by the task force in our 2020 December report. Before we begin our discussion, I wanted to share a couple of logistical points about the ARP. First, local ARP funds allocated to local governments are coming in two waves. Most of the localities have already received their first allocation, about 50% of the funds. This immediate availability of funds is the reason why we're having these sessions now to help provide technical assistance. With money in hand, we know that conversations and decisions regarding priorities for these funds are happening as we speak in communities across North Carolina, and we think the ideas that we're discussing today are worthy of consideration. The second point is the actual process for determining the use of these funds will vary community by community. Some will have a strictly internal process. Some will implement projects with community partners, and others may use a more external facing model. For example, we've already heard of one county that's developing an RFP for community organizations to make proposals. So if you're representing a nonprofit and you're on this call, we recommend that you contact your county and city governments to determine the processes by which they will be allocating their funds. I'll now introduce our panelists today. We will hear first from Adam Levin of the Pew Charitable Trust. Mr. Levin is a principal associate with the State Fiscal Health Project and is a national expert on the use of these local American Rescue Plan funds. Then we're going to hear from representatives from innovative programs in this space across North Carolina. Our first presenter will be Melissa Larson from the North Carolina Harm Reduction Coalition. Ms. Larson oversees the development and implementation of law enforcement assisted diversion, commonly known as LEAD, sites across North Carolina, and provides training to law enforcement on harm reduction topics. And she'll be followed by two people who can give very specific experiences about how the programs are working in their communities. We'll hear from Major Reed Baer, Deputy Chief of the Hickory Police Department, and we'll hear from Charlton Robertson, a peer support specialist from the LEAD program operating in Fayetteville. Finally, just a note on diversion. It is a broad concept, and there are many types of diversion and places where it can exist along the criminal justice process. For the purpose of today's session, we're going to be focused on substance use disorder related programs that happen in the pre-arrest period. The task force recommended implementation of diversion programs broadly across the criminal justice system, and different types may make more sense for your communities. Things like mental health diversion, recovery courts, misdemeanor diversion programs. If you are considering those kinds of programs and would like to make connections, please reach out to us. And our website is, our email is criminaljustice@ncdoj.gov, criminaljustice@ncdoj.gov. And Greg, I don't know if you can put that email address in the chat room. That would be very helpful. So now I will turn it over to Adam Levin with the Pew Charitable Trust. Adam, thank you.
Thank you so much, Attorney General Stein. It's great to be here. I'm going to share my screen. Great. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Adam Levin, and I'm with Pew's State Fiscal Health Program. Pew is a national think tank. We look at fiscal and economic trends throughout the country. I'm also a UNC alum, so I went to grad school at the Department of City and Regional Planning. So it's great to be talking to a North Carolina audience today. I am going to discuss principles that local governments can use in managing the money that they're getting from the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, or ARP, it's all the same. This is something that Pew has provided some technical assistance on, and we're always happy to help out. So the message that I want to convey right at the outset here is that this is a real opportunity for local governments. It's obviously a large amount of money that local governments are getting. Cities and counties throughout the country as a whole are getting about $110 billion from ARPA. And as you can see from the map here, for at least some local governments, county governments in North Carolina, these funds do represent a pretty significant share of their budgets. This is data from the Census Bureau's Census of Governments, which comes out every 5 years, and 2017 was the most recent edition of that. And because the funds actually don't need to be expended for several years from now, there is a real opportunity for local governments to engage in some planning at the outset and really do some priority setting. And further, while there are some restrictions on how the funds can be used, there's also a considerable amount of leeway. There are a few broad categories of eligible uses for the funds. The first is responding to health and economic impacts of the pandemic. The second is responding to disparate impacts that COVID-19 had. Infrastructure and supporting essential workers are also allowed. And then lastly, for local governments that can document that they had revenue loss, specifically directly due to the pandemic, there's also expanded eligibility for what the funds can be used on. For purposes of today's discussion, it's worth noting that diversion programs are allowed under the behavioral health clause, of responding to the pandemic's health impacts. So I'll spend the rest of my time talking about how local governments can best manage the money that they're getting from ARPA. And the main risk that they face is going off a so-called funding or fiscal cliff. Now, this can happen when local governments or states put one-time money, such as that they are getting from ARPA, towards ongoing expenses. The cliff occurs when the spending commitments remain, but the money expires. We saw this happen with the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act in 2009. The vast majority of those funds actually expired at the end of fiscal year 2011, but local governments as well as states had put a large share of that money towards ongoing spending and ongoing programs. And so when the funds ran out, states and local governments were left with a new round of budget cuts and shortfalls. Now this graphic represents the principle. It does use federal and state data, but it does get the idea across. You see in fiscal year 2011, 2012, the fiscal cliff happening. That's when the federal funds started to expire, and so the federal share of state revenue was drastically reduced after that. So one thing that local governments can do to manage this risk is thinking and forecasting long term. ARPA is a huge amount of one-time money, and so local governments should think about what their budgets are going to look like after the funds expire. And because doing this type of forecasting can be difficult, local governments should do it using multiple scenarios. Now, this may reveal lasting or temporary changes as a result of the pandemic. So, for example, tourism-dependent regions were obviously battered by COVID-19, but may start to bounce back more quickly as the virus fades. Other regions may face more lasting challenges. Ultimately, what this hopefully shows is where ongoing regular revenue is going to be over the long term. Again, states want to avoid putting one-time revenue, such as that from ARPA, towards ongoing spending programs. They want to use the regular revenue that they collect all the time for that. Now, there are instances where using one-time funding for ongoing costs can be a good idea. So, for example, if the multi-year revenue forecasts that I was mentioning earlier show that revenue is temporarily depressed, but is expected to recover to levels where it can sustain ongoing spending, using one-time funding as sort of a bridge to get to that point can make sense. Similarly, there may be programs that are experiencing a temporary spike in demand and both spending. So for example, at least at the state level, Medicaid during the pandemic. Now, states and local governments could be well served to use one-time funding to take care of that one-time spike, provided that demand is forecasted to go down in coming years. But I do want to emphasize that the ARPA funds are a real opportunity for local governments. We've already seen throughout the country local governments putting out plans or even already allocating the funds, which suggests that they see it similarly. I have a few examples here on this slide. I'll just highlight one, which is Fairfax County, Virginia, which is very close to where I live, just outside of Washington, D.C. They'll be spending the funds, using the funds on, among other things, behavioral health care, upgrading IT projects, and retail assistance. Now, I know we're focusing today on diversion programs, but I did just want to quickly mention a couple of other types of use that align with the principles that I'm discussing today. And some of those uses could have both fiscal and economic benefits. So one example is deferred infrastructure maintenance, which is actually a pretty large liability for local governments and states. It's needed maintenance that local governments and states need to do on their buildings and roads that they own but have put off as other spending priorities come into place. But using this one-time funds, the one-time funds that local governments will receive from ARPA to put a dent in that total outstanding liability could both help local governments' budgets, as it will reduce liability, and it might also have economic benefits, as spending on infrastructure could create jobs and things like that. Broadband is another project that fits with the principles that we're talking about here today. It's the type of project that can clearly benefit from a one-time infusion of cash and is also economic development related. I think it's also relevant for today's discussion to point out that ARPA specifically allows funds to be used for program evaluation. So this could give local governments some time to do some experimentation, even create some pilot programs, as long as, if those programs do become permanent, they are paid for with ongoing funds and not relied on and not used, and they don't use, sorry, the one-time funds from ARPA to pay for them going forward. That'll do it for me. I'm happy to stick around and take any questions. And for now, I'll turn it back over to Attorney General Stein.
Adam, that was very helpful. Thank you very much. And now we're going to hear from Melissa.
Great. Thank you for the introduction. I appreciate it. I am glad to be here today. As mentioned earlier, we'll be talking about pre-arrest diversion. Work for North Carolina Harm Reduction. This is a statewide grassroots organization that is dedicated to the implementation of harm reduction initiatives, public health strategies, drug policy transformation, and justice reform in North Carolina. So just to kind of set the stage a little bit, the sequential intercept model is a great depiction as to what our criminal justice system looks like when we break it down into intercept points. So this diagram indicates the intercept points in which individuals with mental health and/or substance use disorders can and should be diverted from the traditional criminal justice system and into one that takes a behavioral health approach. So intercept 1 is for pre-arrest diversion programs. That's on the far left. Intercept 2 focuses on post-arrest diversion programs and similar ideas. Intercept 3 operates within the court and jail. Intercept 4 looks at reentry programming, and Intercept 5 focuses on probation and parole. So when we examine each of these intercept points with key local stakeholders, it provides an opportunity to divert individuals from the traditionally punitive criminal justice system, create equity, and connect people with community-based resources who can address their unique needs in a person-centered way. One area in which there's a lot of interest and work going on more recently is Intercept 4, which recognizes that individuals released from the jail who have a substance use disorder are at high risk of overdose and face challenges obtaining treatment unless linkage to care strategies are in place prior to exit. But during this webinar, we'll be specifically talking about Intercept 1, where pre-arrest diversion programs are implemented. An outcome of diversion, which precedes charging an individual, is that participants can avoid the stigma of a criminal record entirely. We all know the challenges the justice-involved population faces in obtaining housing and employment after release, and these are key determinants of health. I'd like to say if your community has not yet completed a sequential intercept mapping process, I highly recommend it. It's a great opportunity to bring your stakeholders to the table to identify current resources while identifying gaps and challenges. It's a collective effort which can have high impact on your overall criminal justice and behavioral health system. And so in essence, you bring all your community stakeholders together and you examine each one of these intercept points as a group. If you want to know more about this process, I recommend Googling the SAMHSA Gain Center. There's quite a lot of information there. So let's talk about LEAD. LEAD is a pre-arrest diversion program, utilizes officer discretion to divert low-level drug offenders and sex workers from the traditional criminal justice system. It provides a harm reduction approach to community-based resources or community-based issues of substance use, mental illness, criminal justice system involvement, and social conditions that impact people's health. It allows officers to be the point of contact to divert these individuals away from the system and into long-term intensive case management services that is based on a harm reduction philosophy. As more and more agencies are realizing the use of the traditional system is not appropriate or effective in addressing behavioral health issues, we're seeing a lot of development of pre-arrest diversion programs. Diverted individuals actually receive what's called a warm handoff. This is into wraparound services such as drug treatment, emergency housing, mental health treatment, peer support, and vocational training. This is really key because individuals really face some challenges and barriers when trying to access treatment on their own. Many times they're called, or they call it an institute or a facility, and they're told to keep calling back every day until a bed is ready. And having a warm handoff and having a case manager, having a peer support specialist navigate through that system with you can be really beneficial. So benefits to having a LEAD program include redirecting officers back to the street to handle more pressing law enforcement priorities, reducing cost savings to social service and medical systems, and reducing drug-related injuries that include overdose deaths, spread of communicable diseases such as HIV and Hep C, and other chronic health conditions. Communities across the nation have implemented a LEAD program based on different individualized needs. Some communities have implemented their program prioritizing their focus on reducing racial disparities in drug arrest. Others have sought to reduce property crime associated with drug use. Some communities have focused on addressing public health and human service needs, while others have created their program to address business and neighborhood concerns about health and safety. In most communities, this is about doing something different. This is about recognizing that previous strategies have not been effective in addressing these issues and conditions. While the name may be law enforcement assisted diversion, this program is much more than about one particular stakeholder. It's about bringing together public health and public safety officials, treatment providers, and directly impacted people for a common goal of improving quality of life for those who use drugs and also reducing the impact on and from the criminal justice system. It's important to note that LEAD programs should create equity by addressing all substances and not simply focusing on opioids. The LEAD program has two overarching goals. One is to reduce criminal justice involvement, and the other is to improve access and increase engagement in treatment and harm reduction services. The use of evidence-based practices can lead to a reduction in criminal justice involvement while removing racial disparities within the criminal justice system and allow an opportunity to focus on social determinants of health. This focus can help communities sustain funding for more effective interventions while strengthening the relationship between public safety and the community. It's important for us to note and realize that drug use, due to its criminal nature, has resulted in people being stigmatized for their health conditions and has also resulted in adversarial relationships between public safety and those who use drugs. Implementing pre-arrest diversion programs allows systems and communities to reorient traditional responses to one that utilizes local partnerships and resources in a collective way. What's great about the LEAD program is the collaboration of existing stakeholders who are willing to come to the table to do something different. This program brings together treatment providers, law enforcement, the district attorney's office, the LME MCO, and harm reduction peer support specialists. LEAD does not require building an entirely new program. This is about bringing together existing stakeholders who have a common goal of reducing crime and connecting individuals who have a substance use disorder to treatment and supportive services. Operating within a harm reduction framework, we realize that no one size fits all. Everyone is on their own journey. We need to meet people where they are. There are no compliance guidelines or sanctions for participants. We believe in attempting to re-engage individuals in services, not using punishment. The LEAD program also recognizes that not everyone is treatment ready at the time of interaction with law enforcement. This is a new conversation for law enforcement and those who are actively using drugs. But for those who are ready for treatment, the program is structured in a way that provides the referring officer a process in which to conduct a warm handoff to the case manager. I think we can all agree that the criminal justice system was never intended to be therapeutic, yet we've continued to process individuals who have underlying behavioral health issues through it, expecting some type of significant change in their drug use and criminal justice involvement. The two broad goals of the LEAD program are to decrease crime-related activity and increase access to treatment and supportive services. We've seen successes within our North Carolina LEAD sites. Prior to COVID-19, sites were seeing an 80% reduction among criminal activity within our participants. Since COVID, this has been reduced, but we still continue to see a significant decrease. Additionally, participants have been able to re-engage in services they have previously used, from harm reduction to more traditional treatment services. Now, this stat I have on here that says a 60% reduction in criminal justice involvement, this is actually coming from the Seattle LEAD program. We're working currently on getting our North Carolina formal evaluation completed, and we expect that in the next year. I would love to now pass it over to Major Reed Bear. He is our law enforcement representative for the Hickory Catawba LEAD site.
Thank you, Melissa. I'm going to talk a little bit about a very broad overview of our program called LEAD Catawba. Melissa's done a great job of covering the principles of LEAD and the reasons that a lot of agencies have chosen this particular program. We chose this program back in 2016 and 17. We as an agency were looking for ways to combat what we were seeing in the community, just like a lot of other communities across the country with the opioid epidemic. In addition to methamphetamine, particularly in our area, and the systemic issues of crime that resulted from the substance use disorder of those substances. We looked at a lot of different diversion programs, and I will say that North Carolina does have a lot of good diversion programs going on throughout the state. And I would just encourage anyone who is watching this, you really need to know your community, work with your community and partner with your community to figure out which one of these may be right for your community. LEAD was the obvious choice for us because it really does give a very broad net, if you will, to be able to help the most people. We were looking at a lot of different things going on in our community, and we recognized a long time ago in Hickory that you're not going to rest your way out of a drug addiction problem or substance use disorder problem. And we decided to try to partner with the agencies in our county. We have 9 law enforcement agencies in Catawba County. We currently have 6 of those law enforcement agencies in LEAD Catawba, to include Hickory, the Catawba County Sheriff's Office, Newton, Conover, Claremont, Maiden, police departments, the DA's office, and our service providers, which is Catawba Valley Behavioral Health. And the way LEAD works, I'm just going to kind of walk you through it. When our officers are called to a situation where they have perhaps a shoplifting or low-level offense, and the officers recognize that the individual who has committed this offense is committing these offenses as a result of supporting a substance use habit, the officers have this LEAD program as a tool. And I want to stress the importance of presenting it to officers in your community for buy-in as a tool in their tool belt. Law enforcement, we've been presented with so many different things over the years. This is my 25th year in the profession, and I can tell you it's a totally different career than it was in 1996. And we have to have all the tools at our disposal because we're constantly being called to more and more social issues as opposed to traditional law enforcement issues where a crime has occurred and we're simply investigating and prosecuting. We really have to be able to do so much more. LEAD enables officers to recognize that there is an individual here in front of them that is suffering from a substance use disorder where arrest is not going to help this individual. They have to recognize that LEAD is a tool where they can offer these individuals help in the form of a connection to a case manager who works for, in our case, works for our service provider, Catawba Valley Behavioral Health. You heard Melissa say you meet people where they are, and we do have a lot of individuals that we come in contact with who defer and decide not to go into treatment that time because they're not ready. But our goal is to find those that are and get them connected to treatment as quickly as possible. We actually call it a warm handoff because we find that when someone's ready, the quicker you can connect them to those services, the chances of success go up quite a bit. So those officers contact, instead of making the arrest at a call, let's just say, for example, it's a shoplifting. If the individual meets a list of criteria, i.e. not having a violent criminal history and a few other things, then they're eligible for LEAD and they do accept it. We contact the case manager and we make that connection right then. And in lieu of arrest, that person is connected to our case manager, who then does a complete clinical assessment on what needs does that individual have? What are they missing that is perhaps exacerbating the issue of them using these substances and causing them to go out and, for example, in this case, commit a shoplifting. That person is then engaged in a set of wraparound services, which can consist of anything from drug treatment to anger management. In our case, we have added more elements in our program to include job placement, mentoring, and coaching classes. And again, I stress that it's really different depending on the community. You'll see that other LEAD programs might do it a little different, that just makes more sense in their community. But you wrap these individuals in you wrap services around these individuals in order to try to keep them connected. If they complete the clinical assessment, then that original charge of shoplifting is never brought, the person's never charged with shoplifting. And therefore they never enter the system. As you heard Attorney General Stein say earlier, these are pre-arrest. So these individuals are not arrested. There is no arrest record. There is not that stigma that they've been arrested for that crime, and in hopes that that will enable them to be more successful when it comes to receiving those wraparound services. The other way that we, the police department, can put someone in LEAD is through what we call a social referral. So we don't necessarily have to be called to a situation where someone has allegedly committed a crime or has committed a crime. Our officers here in Hickory are actually assigned permanently to the neighborhoods that they patrol. And so as a result, they get to know the individuals in the community, and they know who may be suffering from substance abuse or substance use disorder. And so they can approach these individuals in day-to-day conversation and tell them about our LEAD program and offer them the same kind of services that we're offering the individual who we were with yesterday at the shoplifting call. And then it works the same way. Those individuals who say, I think I'm ready for treatment, and maybe this needed a little conversation, this nudge to know that they have someone who maybe cares about them, someone who's been watching and is concerned about their behavior and wants them to be able to get treatment and actually can provide that treatment. Then we make that same connection to that case, our case manager. And there is a clinical assessment done. And then the process is exactly the same, with the exception of the charge, the charge that was originally diverted. We just don't have the diversion. And what we have found here in our county is that the vast majority of our LEAD referrals have actually turned into social referrals opposed to charge diversions, because once the officers in this community have seen the benefits of getting someone help opposed to arresting someone, they much rather try to get ahead of it and try to get someone into treatment prior to this person ended up in a situation where they've committed a crime. So buy-in is huge. I heard Melissa, or maybe it was Attorney General Stein, say, law enforcement has traditionally, the system has changed, and it has to change. It has to progress. We've been very fortunate in our county that the funding for our program for the first 3 years came from a nonprofit. And we've been able to sustain funding through other means simply because it works. And when I say it works, the latest numbers that we have seen, now I'm going to give you two sets of numbers, because prior to COVID, and as you heard Attorney General Stein say, COVID has really made a huge impact in a bad way with regard to substance use disorder and some of the issues we've seen in our state. We had approximately an 80% rate of our clients that were referred into LEAD not reoffending. not having the police called back out for another situation. COVID impacted us just like it did everyone else. Services shut down for an extent of time. Those in-person services, some of them went to Zoom like we're on now, which maybe was not as effective for some of our clients. So that rate right now, as of today, we are still seeing about a 65% rate of our clients, however, that do not reoffend and are not re-engaged in the criminal justice system after their referral into our LEAD program. And we consider that a success, obviously. We always like to present it to our community as, this is a tool for our officers. It's for the community. We take community referrals community will call in and tell us, hey, I have a family member or a neighbor who I've been talking to, and I've been telling them about your program that I saw you do the presentation on. Can you come speak to them? And we'll go do that. We're hopeful to see these some more data. As you heard Melissa say, we've been involved with Duke University regarding our program, which was one of the programs that was studied, and we're very excited to see how we can improve. Our goal is to offer this program to everyone in our community or anyone who is suffering from a substance use disorder. We recognize fully that getting someone help early on is much better than the alternative of them actually going into the criminal justice system, because once that happens, it's so hard in a lot of cases for them to get employment or other things because of that stigma. So I'll end with that. I know there'll be questions later, and that was a very brief overview, but thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Sergeant Bear. Charlton, Ms. Robertson.
Yes, good afternoon. How's everyone? Thank you for that introduction. My role as a peer support person in the community is very important in gaining support with the community and assisting them with understanding the benefits of the program, like reduced property crimes and impact on safety within the community. As my predecessor just spoke about, COVID-19 has had a great impact on how people have been able to access services over the past year. It's isolated people in so many ways. People have developed a lack of confidence in the ability to access certain resources. My role has been able to reestablish that confidence over the past few months and ensure people understand how to access the available resources. And then off the referrals, they have been extra important in legitimizing the work that I do as a peer support specialist. Participants appear to be more motivated and feel they are supported, and that the help is really real. In those ways, being a lead peer support specialist has been beneficial in many ways, as far as helping me maintain contact with individuals. Usually I try to touch bases with individuals weekly, and I do perform what I call a RAP assessment with those individuals, which is it's just a RAP assessment is just assessing their individual needs, and helping them determine what is most important for them at the time. So it may be substance abuse, it may be housing or vocational, or either healthcare needs. I get them linked to HIV and Hep C testing and stuff like that. So those are some of the resources that I'm able to assist them with.
Well, that's excellent, Mr. Robertson. Thank you very much. With the Catawba program, they talked about, the Sergeant Bear talked about there being a case manager with Catawba Valley Behavioral Health. In Fayetteville, are you performing that same role? Ms. Robertson, or do you also have a case manager with a mental health provider who also ensures that the person has sufficient wraparound services?
Exactly. We do have a case manager, and when they're entered into the program, a clinical assessment is performed with those individuals. And then I start to work with them according to a plan that's developed with their, during that assessment. And then, I kind of help them prioritize what their needs are, and we'll go through the numbers that way.
And we know that to help somebody who's sort of struggling with either a mental health or a substance use issue problem, when you're engaging with them outside the crisis, you want to have consistent contact with them. And I heard you say that you meet with your folks, you try to meet with them weekly. Melissa, I don't know if there's a standard throughout the LEAD programs across North Carolina where you all try to have certain engagement with them, but I know that must be an incredible juggling act to meet with them consistently enough to have that engagement, to connect them with the appropriate services, but at the same time managing people's caseload. And just wanted to get your thoughts, Melissa, on that tension.
Yeah,
go ahead, Charlton.
Yeah. So I call it a check-in. I try to check in, whether I've connected them with employment resources. I check in with them, see how it's going, see what challenges they're experiencing, whether it's substance use treatment. I kind of check in with them weekly to see if they're getting acclimated. They have the plan, and I'm kind of like the chaperone. I kind of help them, walk them through their plan, and if their plan needs adjusting, I'll get back with the team, the case manager, and our linkage to care coordinator, and we'll adjust the plan. So I just want the participants to feel like they're being supported and not abandoned. Like, hey, you signed up with this program, and this is what we want you to do. Now you're on your own.
Good luck.
I'm kind of there to kind of hold their hand through there and let them know that they're supported throughout the process, and that one failure does not, mean that, hey, you messed up and, messed up on your chance. I continue to encourage them through, the challenges that they may face.
And how many clients are you working with, Charlton?
I'm working with approximately about 18 now.
Okay. Melissa, did you want to talk about that tension?
Yeah, I just wanted to say we kind of take a two-pronged approach. We have our traditional case manager that does the clinical assessment and does a lot of the referral work, but then you've got a peer support specialist, someone like Charlton, who's really out there on the street, knocking on the door, sending a text message, calling, whatever that participant is most comfortable with, and making that contact as frequently as Charlton and that person have kind of set up. They develop a relationship based on trust and non-judgmental conversation. And in the beginning, people have a higher level of need. And so there is more contact. But then as time goes on and they're more connected to other treatment modalities, we see they need less of our support, which is because they're now making their own journey. And so that caseload can fluctuate, and that communication with individuals can fluctuate. But with all of our LEAD programs, we do highly encourage sites to have both a case manager and a peer support specialist. Case manager is typically a full-time position, and then peer support, based on the size of the community, could be part-time or full-time.
Sergeant Bear, have you all been able to use the peer support model, or are you just focused on the case managers at this stage?
We've been very fortunate. Our case manager for the majority of our program, because of his background, has also been able to serve in a peer support role, which I think has really strengthened his connections to our clients. We do have a new case manager, and we are still working on supplementing some more peer support. Peer support is, in the 3 years that we've been doing it, peer support is absolutely crucial, absolutely crucial.
Do you know how many clients there are in Catawba county among the 6 agencies that are participating?
Yeah, we've referred approximately 84 people into the program, and of those 84, we currently have about 46 that are active and participate, that we classify as active and participating with services.
That's great. I know that another pre-arrest model is what Chief Bayshore, formerly of Tarboro, used to call the HOPE Initiative, where he basically just said, I have an open door and you can initiate the entrance into my office and I will then help connect you to these services. Do you find that any of your clients have that initiative, or is it more just that being your officers are in the community, have the relationships and know which conversations to start with which people?
Yeah, we actually did look at that program when we were doing our research. It's a wonderful program. For us, because of the way we're structured we have our community policing model, most of ours comes from the officers. They know a lot of the members of the community. They know the neighborhoods they work in. And we have actually now have community referrals. We're seeing more community referrals, people approaching the officers out in the field and asking about the program. So it has started to continue to grow in that way as well.
Yeah, I think that it takes time for the community to look at law enforcement in a different way. And so usually somebody who's using drugs and is addicted wants to be as far away from an officer as he or she can, because they know what they're doing is illegal and they don't want to have a criminal record. And so it takes time for the reputation to get out in the community that you're actually trying to help prevent people from being arrested, either now or in the future, by helping them get the services they need. As it relates to the critical services, Melissa, you mentioned mental health counseling, drug treatment, housing, vocational job stuff. What are the critical services that a community needs to wrap around somebody who engages or enters into a lead program through, usually through a law enforcement point of entry?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Not every community is going to have every resource that their neighbor has. And so when you start this process of exploring whether or not a lead program would work in your community, it's really sitting down with your main service providers, whether it's inpatient, outpatient, finding out what kind of services they have, bringing your LME or MCO to the table to find out the same question. What are services do we have locally? What gaps? One of the issues that we have in our more rural communities is transportation. You know, it's one thing to encourage and support someone to go to treatment, but if they don't have transportation to get there 2 or 3 days a week, you know, we've really kind of set them up for failure. And so you have to have these tough conversations to say, all right, what are our gaps and challenges so we can forecast how to support those individuals?
Are there some services that are so critical that if a community doesn't have them, then this isn't the right type of program for them to consider?
Charlton, you probably could answer this, but my response would be outpatient services, and it's really helpful. So they can have group, they can have therapy, but having methadone or Suboxone prescription or prescribing is really important also. But Charlton, what do you think?
Yeah, I have looked at, in my work, in my time, in working in the field, I looked at 2 of the social determinants of health that were, the most egregious barriers to people being successful in recovery, and those were, as you mentioned, transportation and also safe recovery environments. Having housing or sober living houses for people to be able to come out of the environments that they're currently using in, and that continue to be triggers for them. Other than that, I think that, once we address those barriers, I think that, the other resources are pretty, in pretty much abundant in the community. There are a lot of vocational assistance, a lot of healthcare assistance and mental health treatment. I think all of those resources are available and accessible if we could address those 2 barriers, the the safe living, safe recovery environment, and transportation.
Sergeant Bear, you want to address the need for ancillary services?
We're always looking for and always need more. We identify lower shortcomings throughout our program. I'll echo what the other panelists said. Here, we definitely would need some extra beds, and we constantly continue. Our case manager continues to run into finding places for some of our clients to go when they need long-term treatment. The ease of getting them into long-term treatment, the transportation piece, just like Charlton said. So all those things.
Let's talk a minute about the costs, because Adam made a really important point that you don't want to ramp up a big program and then the funding just expires and then it goes away. But I would think that there are savings to county and city budgets to the extent these programs take root and are successful. And have you all analyzed what the upfront starting costs to start a program like this is, and what the ongoing costs are, and then are there eventually the savings necessary where the program supports itself? And so why don't I have the three panelists who have familiarity with the program in North Carolina address that, and then Adam, if you can talk about that dynamic of long-term savings potentially supporting model programs.
I'd love to start off answering that question. I think it's really, two things are really important. One is assessing what your daily jail cost is. So some of our communities are spending anywhere from $80 to $120 plus a day just in treatment. Now, a lot of times we use the evaluation results from the Seattle program because it was a robust evaluation. And what they found was treatment out in the community averaged about $26 a day. So it's a big no-brainer to say, okay, do we want to take people through the jail system, spend, let's just say $100 a day, not provide them treatment, not address the underlying substance use, behavioral health concerns, release them and start the process back over again. So the cost savings really can be there. And the great thing about Lee, the second point is this is about your existing stakeholders. If any communities ever developed a recovery court, drug treatment, veterans court, probably one of the first things you did is said, okay, who are our local providers? Who's our community stakeholders? They're already at the table. Let's bring them together. So when you're talking about implementing a new LEAD program, you already have a DA, you already have law enforcement, you already have an LME MCO who knows where these pockets of money are for special populations or just general treatment for behavioral health. And so bringing them to the table. Now, cost can come a factor with your case manager. And if you're really creative in your community and you have some providers who are already providing case management to other populations and are really invested in this program, they can support you through the case management. So we've been very happy and benefited in several communities from using that process. The peer support component, a little bit more difficult to fund. We've had to get creative there through foundation dollars, through grant dollars. But again, let's just say you had to get a case manager and a peer support and you're spending about $100,000, give or take, every year to fund this program. And then you compare that to the jail days, the cost savings there. And that's just the jail, because that's a tangible number for us, right? It's a little bit more difficult to assess cost savings in the court system or social service systems. But, the numbers really speak for themselves. And not only that, but you're really improving people's quality of life, and you can't put a number on that.
And also, Melissa, I would like to speak to some of the ancillary benefits of having, peer support and having me, for instance, here in Fayetteville, providing harm reduction materials like Narcan and such. What I've seen with some of the, my first responders that I associate with, fire departments, EMS, police officers, they have to frequent these emergency situations where people are overdosing or situations that arise because of drug abuse. Some of those things have been quelled by peer support involvement, because we've seen how the distribution of Narcan in some areas have reduced the number of EMS calls in that area because of the Narcan distribution, and people being able to take responsibility for their drug use and whatnot. And what it does for me from a harm reduction perspective, I'm constantly in that person's face, presenting options and alternatives for them for their active drug use. So it benefits our city officials in that way, because a lot of times they can suffer from what we call compassion fatigue, by having to go over to the same place over and over, where I could be kind of a liaison for that, in some cases.
And for us, we have actually seen real cost savings as well. The two, well, first off, I think there was a question about the cost of the program for us. The only cost that we have is we do have our full-time case manager. So Catawba Valley Behavioral Health has a full-time position. So the salary benefits package. So that would depend upon your community and how you decide to employ a case manager. Just as Melissa said, you can get creative, but here that is the only cost. In the savings, we have we did talk to the Catawba County Jail, and we looked at how much it costs to have someone in jail in Catawba County. And lead opposed to putting someone in jail is less than 1/4 of the cost of taking someone to jail per day in Catawba County. And then as to what Charlton was mentioning, our officers, time and efficiency. When officers are not tied up with a couple of hours of paperwork for a misdemeanor crime, and instead are able to point someone in the direction of help and connect them to a case manager and get back out answering calls and doing those other things they need to do in the community, there is I don't know that that's monetary, but there is a definite savings in the community there for efficiency, officer morale, and just as Charlton said, officers going repeatedly to the same call over and over again, that emotional fatigue that takes place.
Very helpful. Adam?
Yeah, I think there are two things that when we're talking about American Rescue Plan funding, at least that are pertinent to this question. I think the first is that money can be used for program evaluation. So there might be opportunities to do things like cost benefit analyses, that type of analysis that might be able to show whether there were more upfront costs or otherwise. And then the other related thing is that I mentioned that funds don't expire for several years. The funds actually don't need to be fully expended until the end of 2026. So even though this is one-time funding, it's one-time funding that lasts for quite a while. When you have 4 or 5 years and program evaluation is also an allowable use, I think there is an opportunity to look at the costs for the next 4 or 5 years and see how they line up, see where improvements could be made, things like that.
Yeah, and it gives, if you have that 4-year runway and you have the ability to evaluate, have you actually had a net savings by operating this program? When the funding goes away, then it becomes a no-brainer for the county to pick it up, because it has actually saved the taxpayers, which gets at sort of definitions of success. I can see a number of different types of success that you would want to measure. 1, reduction in crime. 2, savings to the taxpayer. 3, number of people who are successfully in recovery. 4, just enhancement to people's quality of life. But what are other ways to measure success? Are those the right one? Is what I said correct? Are there other ways to measure it? Are they the wrong ways to measure it? Let's start with you.
Yeah, it's a great question, because there's so many ways that we can define success, because there's so many different stakeholders. Everyone has their own barometer, right? So criminal justice, they're looking for numbers, reduced recidivism, harm reduction. We're looking for more people engaged in syringe exchange services, less people experiencing an overdose, injury, or death, and more people getting Hep C and HIV testing. And then the LME MCO, they're probably looking for increased numbers in treatment and more long-term engagement. So you know, that's the great thing about LEAD sitting in a harm reduction framework, is that it's any small positive, any change, any small change, whether it's positive or, you know, so yeah, the list could go on.
Great. Charlton, what are some of the successes that you've seen that engender the most pride in you?
Well, the one stands out the most. We were able to engage a young man last year in our LEAD program, and he, immediately, engaged in treatment, mental health services, substance abuse services, and he was able to transition and make mend some relationship issues. He was able to transition, and he actually text messaged me last week. He moved to Mississippi. He got a great job out there with his dad and out there, and he was just keeping thanking me for helping him, thanking the program for assisting him, because he was really going through a dark chapter in his life when we first met him, when me and one of the sergeants down here first met him and signed him up in LEAD. And he was like, that was very rewarding for me, because we did really work hard with him to try to get him on track. And he was working before he left here, and then he was able to just transition out there to a better job, reestablish relationship with his dad, and he text messages me once a month, letting me know that everything is going good, and he's very thankful for us helping him.
That speaks to the quality and depth of your relationship, that even if he's in Mississippi, he's still touching base with you and letting you know how things are going. So that's what it's all about. It's about trying to help people live a more fulfilling life, one where they're making their own choices and they're not making choices dictated by their body's chemical dependence. And so I think this is an excellent program. We at the Department of Justice have been trying to lift up programs like LEAD across the state with different law enforcement agencies. If there are any agencies out there that want to learn more that haven't started, I'm sure that Melissa and Sergeant Bear, Charlton, they would all be happy to answer your questions. We put in the chat an email where you can email us any questions you may have. So if you're a municipality, that's one way to go. And if you're one of the nonprofits that do the kind of wraparound services and you want to see this kind of program initiated in your community, then this is an excellent way, going to your policymakers and say, look, you have these ARP funds. We've got a proven way that you can use these funds to meet the criteria of the program, of the grants, and make a difference in your communities, keep people safer, save the taxpayer money, and improve people's quality of lives. Would any of you in the last 1 or 2 minutes want to offer a final comment? I'll start with you, Adam.
Yeah, I think that like we've talked about, sort of thinking forward, thinking long term, thinking forward, which I think has come through in the comments from the other panelists in terms of program substance. It also works from a fiscal perspective. So I think that's the message that I would leave everyone with here today.
Thanks for being here, Melissa.
I think my final thoughts would be just remembering that this program can be reflective of the resources that you do have. If you don't feel like you've got the Taj Mahal, it's okay. We can figure it out. You've got some resources that people are really wanting to use.
Sergeant Bear?
Just now more than ever, I think if police departments have to be problem solvers, and programs like this are tools that enable you to solve problems in your community hand in hand with your community. So we need to always look for those and try them if you think they'll work.
That's great. Thank you. Ms. Robertson?
Yeah, I just want to say how important I think LEAD is for everyone involved. The police officers, the community at large, everyone. We We live and work here in our communities. We have a vested interest in our communities as far as, property values, crime, so, I don't, I feel good about the work I do because I feel like I'm helping make communities safe, for my kids and my wife to be able to go to the store without, being a victim of a crime and stuff like that. So, I think LEAD is, I think it's scratching the iceberg, tip of the iceberg, but I think it's a very important part of it, of what we do.
Well, thank all of you, the panelists today, and thanks everybody who watched. Take care, everybody.